Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon. You got a belly up to the bar. We've kept you a seat, and it's great to see you back because it is Tuesday, September 19th, 2017, the year of our Lord, and we're back on the radio on the SHR Media Network, and we're also on the High Plains Pundit Radio Network. And you can go to YouTube to see us. By the way, if you go to the SHR Media Facebook page right now, you can watch us live. If you go to the SHR Media page on YouTube, you can watch us live there as well. Wait a minute. Us? Who the hell is us? Me. I mean me, okay? Flackbait is gonna be your bartender tonight. He pours with the best of them. The lava lamp is in fact lighted to my left, your right. If you're watching on YouTube, if you happen to be watching on Facebook. Easy peasy, no charge, doesn't cost you a damn thing. We don't water our drinks just like we don't water our conversation. Politics, religion, crime, culture, economics, race, sex, science, law, we talk about it all here at the Saloon. Nothing is sacred, the speech is free, but the booze is not. All that we ask is that you flush the toilet, jiggle the handle, and don't fortet. Right. Listen, folks, I want to tell you seriously, you never want to fortet. You can forget, but you can never fortet. And you can never forget not to fortet. We have on the air, if I'm not mistaken, right off the bat, El Bat, that's Spanish for the bat. We have Dan Butcher, media mogul extraordinaire of High Plains Pundit Radio. And I have to ask, Dan, are you there, sir?
BZ, how the hell are you doing tonight, my friend?
I am doing wonderfully, absolutely wonderfully. It's, let's see, it's 10, a little bit after 10 o'clock where you live in Texas, and it's a little bit after 8 o'clock where I am, and it's a little bit after 11 o'clock on the far right coast, and in Bolivia it's 1775 and 119 seconds. Why Bolivia goes by that clock, I'll never ever know. So, Dan, good to hear you tonight because, as per normal, you know, it's sad there just isn't anything to talk about, except I have 3 topics. And I'm
and right off the bat, I don't have a clue what we're going to talk about tonight.
But I'm gonna throw them at you, and I'm not going to necessarily go where you're thinking. I'm not going to go the obvious, because I kind of hate to do that sometimes. Well, one of the things that I found out today, and I'd like to hear you what you think about this. I frequently go to, and it's a good website. I go to campusreform.org because if you want to find out all about the silliness and the ridiculous shite that's going on throughout the fruited plain in the schools where you, mommy and daddy, are throwing your really good money to have your little children educated. Well, here's a story that I found in campusreform.org. It says this. Here's the headline. Poll. 19% of students endorse violence to, quote, prevent speakers. A new Brookings Institution survey finds that 19% of undergraduate students support using violence to shut down controversial speakers. Another, you'll love this, Dan, another 51% supported the use of the so-called heckler's veto to shout down speakers that are opposed by protesters. I almost don't know where to go with that. I guess we're starting to actually not have a First Amendment anymore. And these dopes, these morons and professors and little muddled brains think, well, that's just okay. That's fine.
Well, it's well, the first thing you say about all this is, isn't it great that all the progressive lunacy is on full display right here? It's full Donald Trump derangement syndrome that's causing a lot of this. But you're seeing, especially a very, very interesting movement on a lot of our college campuses. You have college professors openly saying, hey, you know what? We shouldn't have free speech. You have college professors openly calling for and teaching that the Constitution of the United States needs to be rewritten, that the entire United States of America needs to be remade in the progressive image. That in reality, the United States has been a failure. I know people cannot comprehend this a lot of times, because that's certainly a lot different than what you and I were taught. Starting in kindergarten, moving up. Of course, a lot of our college kids today, they're seeking degrees in basket weaving and in social justice studies, et cetera, et cetera. They want to be a community organizer. I've probably mentioned this statistic before, that a lot of times when I'm asked to give talks to college kids, specifically future reporters, future journalists, and one of the questions that I always ask is, what do you think your job as a reporter should be? And I specifically word it that way because, a lot of these folks, they see themselves, when I was coming up, as a young reporter, hey, I investigative journalism. I'm supposed to report the news. I'm supposed to get to the bottom of the story. It didn't matter if the readers agreed with me or not. A lot of them would hate me. As a reporter, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But as long as you were reporting the news, you were doing your job. As long as you kept digging until there was nothing else to dig for, and you got to the truth, to the bottom of the matter, you were doing your job. But the number one answer that I get today is social justice. A lot of reporters see their roles not to be a checks and balances on the United States government, not to be a defender of freedom, not to be a defender of free speech, not to be a defender of the Constitution of the United States, not to investigate, but it's social justice. Their role is to make a change. Their role as a reporter is to use the medium to make a change, and that surprises a lot of people. So when you start seeing these type of surveys, you see them all the time. And folks, if you want to see what's going on a lot of times on the college campuses, campusreform.org is a great place to go and see what's happening there. But you certainly see a lot of this taking place. In the call for violence, you have, once again, you're talking about folks that are offended by everything. Everything is racist. Everything is offensive. Everything is a trigger. Everyone needs safe spaces. What? During World War II, a safe space for an 18-year-old was a tank. And now you have these young college kids calling for safe spaces because, Donald Trump woke up in the morning, and then you see them, and with the rise of the new incarnation, Antifa has been around for a long time. It's been around, since the turn of the century at least, and it's bred different forms and different variations in different decades, and now we see what we're seeing with it today. It's not surprising that you would see stuff like this. That people would openly call for violence in stopping free speech. They would openly call for violence to stop elections. They would openly call for violence, so that other people could not spread their message and have their right to say. But on the flip side of that, it is still refreshing to know that there are some folks out there, there are some young people out there that do have a lick of common sense and are starting to kind of see, hey, you know what, this is a bunch of bullshit. And, you know, and some people, a lot of it is amazing how quickly a progressive becomes a capitalist when they have to start paying rent, a house, a mortgage, a car payment, their own kids' college tuition, etc. You know, when real life and reality sets in, a lot of times in the past that has cured a lot of these ills. But it's kind of a little different mechanism, because at the very root of this percentage, you have certain groups that not only have they infiltrated, you know, into our communities and a lot of the riots. You know, these aren't protests. These are full out blown riots that we have seen in a lot of our cities. But when you have elements such as the Nation of Islam, the New Black Panthers, La Raza, and even on the right side of that, we have a fair share of radicals to the far right that are complete loonies. But when you start having these radical elements feeding into this, and you start mixing in with the paid protesters and such, you know, that does have an influence on a lot of these folks. And you start seeing, you know, hey, you know, they start to see, you know, I one of the vivid things that I saw during when Hurricane Irma hit in Florida was the looting that was taking place.
Yep.
While the hurricane was going. You have to stop and think, what in the hell type of mentality has gotten into these young people's brains that they need to loot a sporting goods store so that they have fashionable footwear during hurricane season?
No, you're looking at it wrong. I'm sorry, Dan, I beg to differ. You're looking at it wrong.
Okay.
All they were doing is, these were very expensive shoes, and they were concerned about the welfare of the shoes. And all they were doing, Dan, all they were doing is just liberating those shoes from the confines of those stores. That's all they were doing.
The same thing had to do with those 64-inch flat screen TVs. They wanted to make sure that they got in out of the weather, right?
Well, listen, how could you stand to watch good electronics like that go to waste? Well, the answer is no. All they were doing is liberating them and putting them in their own homes. It's simple. It's a simple matter of protection. They were just protecting them. That's all they were doing. They were very simply undocumented shoppers doing a good deed. Well, okay, that's one exact way to look at it. You know, you were talking about this particular. Well, I was talking about this particular article from Campus Reform, and it goes further. It says, while 39% of responders indicated that hate speech is protected by the First Amendment, oh, dig this, Dan, 44% said that it is not protected by the document. And here's a kicker, 16% remained undecided. Are you kidding me? Well, the answer is no, you're not, because you said yourself. The two words that I noticed when you were talking to young journalists, that they didn't immediately spew two extremely important words. They didn't say the word fact, and they didn't say the word truth, because apparently facts and truth are not a priority anymore. How sad is that?
No, making a change is the priority. And and once again, it goes solely back to, there's lots of different ways. There's lots of different, areas that you could lay the blame. You can lay the blame on the education system. You can lay the blame on the way these people were brought up. There's lots of different things to go around. But bottom line is, the number one solution to all of this is, just good old-fashioned common sense. Read the Constitution of the United States of America. It's nothing but the founding fathers. When they wrote this document, they knew that they had hopes. that the country would expand and that it would grow. And they wrote that document in such a way to incorporate that future growth and expansion. They knew they knew different issues were going to come to rise, that times were going to change. They had history, they had precedent to base the writing of the Constitution on. So they knew that future generations would have different issues to deal with. And that is why they wrote the document in such a way as to incorporate that change. It was written with common sense. Think about that. The bottom line, the Constitution of the United States of America was written with common sense in mind. And it's when you start taking common sense out of the equation that we start seeing this type of nonsense, that everything is hate speech, everything is offensive. The violence that's taking place, trigger mechanisms, safe spaces, et cetera. Just a return to good old-fashioned common sense is the way to address a lot of this. So somebody saying, well, Dan, that sounds, hey, that's a mighty big thing to be saying, but how the hell are you going to accomplish that? Well, you know how we're going to accomplish that? Just keep going at it, because I have faith. Because our country's always risen up. When we've had progressivism in the past, raising its ugly head, common sense has taken hold. And, Donald Trump, President of the United States, let's face it, he's done some boneheaded things. He's done a lot of good things as well. But he has his own party fighting against him, and so now you see Trump turning and working with the Democrats. Well, bipartisanship is a good thing. Bipartisanship can also be a bad thing. The various the way the government was set and how it was split up into the various ways that it was, with the House, with the Senate, with the judicial branch, with the executive branch. It was set up in a way to actually force people to discuss, to force a stalemate, and to make you have compromise. And if there wasn't compromise, hey, you know what? It didn't move forward. It was meant to slow things down a little bit so that you thought them out and that you had the correct policies in place. And unfortunately, as we saw with Obamacare, that did not take place.
No.
They circumvented the process a little bit. But, bottom line is that we just have to keep pounding away. Me personally, as a reporter, as a journalist, on my website, we do straight investigative reporting. We also do commentary and opinion of how we see things. If we make a mistake, we own up to it. We don't try to cover the fact. It's not that we were doing fake news. You know what? We made a mistake. We own up to it, and we look in the other way and say, okay, why did we make that mistake? You don't just stop the story there. You find why you made the mistake, and you keep pressing on. And so that's what we have to keep doing. And with shows like this, you know what, folks? Sit down at the dinner table. Talk to your kids. Talk to your spouse. Know what's going on around in your community. BZ, it's very sad. It's very sad. This is a testament that we have become, in some ways, a very self-centered society. Very
Yes.
we have forgotten who our neighbors are. We have forgotten who our family is in a lot of cases. And that's what leads to a lot of this. And, if we just come back and go back to the basic foundation of what made this country great to begin with, and that starts at home with the family, and then it spreads out. And I know I preach this all the time. People get tired of me saying, but everything starts at home at the dinner table.
Yes.
Then it spreads out to your neighbors. Then it spreads out to your community. Then to your county. Then to your state. Then to your region. Then to the country. Then to the world. That's the way it was designed to set up. That's the way the United States was designed to function. And people have forgotten that.
In that particular article, there's a lot of this is very bothersome, but in one survey question, the students were also asked if they preferred a learning environment where certain views are prohibited versus an open learning environment, quote, where students are exposed to all types of speech and viewpoints. According to the study, 53% of respondents said they prefer the former, while only 47% chose the latter. Those are closed minds. That's that's an incredible statistic in and of itself. The survey results establish with data what has been clear anecdotally to anybody who's been observing campus dynamics in recent years. And I submit to you, Dan, it's because students, young persons, are not challenged. Therefore, they don't have stress. They have all the time in the world to navel gaze, and they've been protected by their loving helicopter parents. Oh my, Dan, oh my. What happens when they step out into the real world and it slaps them on their arse?
Well, when they step out in the real world, they're going to find themselves. This is a very telling statistic about the numbers of when you look at past generations about the numbers, and I can't remember them right off the top of my head, but versus previous generations about the ages of when people were moving out of their parents' house, going out and starting out in the real world, living on their own, buying their first homes. All of those numbers, the age range has gone up. It's gone up and up and up. We have more people living at home over the age of 30 today than we ever have had in the history of our country. Think about that. I could not imagine living in my parents' house.
Oh, hell,
past me personally, past the age of 20.
Yeah, would you want to?
I moved out when I was 17.
Yeah.
but you have these young people that they're starting out in life so much later. They're starting out so much later. Getting out from under their parents' wings, that when they do step out, there's a culture shock at what real life is. And this goes back to, and I use this as an example. The Obama administration Barack Obama filled up his administration with a bunch of quote unquote educated people.
Yeah.
Okay, he had a lot of collegiate people that, Ivy League folks that thought, hey, you know what? We're going to get into office and, we're going to bring all of these theories that we have and we're going to put them into policy. Well, here's the problem, and this also applies to science. When you have science and you want to prove something, you go through a series of steps to prove if it's a functioning thing, if it's real or not, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when the Obama administration came in and they put all of these theories into policy and put them into the real world, they quickly found out, because they weren't real world tested, they quickly found out and they were exposed as complete and utter failures, aka Obamacare. If you want to talk about, you want to see if anybody wants to see a real world study of what socialized medicine would look like, and you want to compare it, we've always, people say, well, let's compare it to Canada. Let's compare it to Europe or whatever. Okay, well, you know what? Let's compare it here in the United States. Look at the VA system. If you want to see the complete and utter failure of what socialized medicine would look like in the United States of America, go no further than the VA system.
Run with all the efficiency.
Is a theory that was put in place, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And then you see. So what happens is these college professors, these kids are taught all these theories with no real world practicality.
True.
See?
True. Run with all the efficiency and the loving, caring goodness of your local DMV.
Exactly.
Because you're going to get great service, great help. People care about what's going on when you go to your local DMV. So, hey, if that works for the VA and that's the model you want, you know what, folks? That just very well might be the model that you're going to end up getting. We got about another 5 minutes, and you went into my brain right off the bat. And I may as well bring this right up. And I have to say, Dan, it's a disturbing brain in here, and there's only room in here for me and not you. But you went somewhere that I was going to go, and it's taken me quite some time to go there. But since you brought it up, you opened the door, I'm going to walk all the way through it. And that's this. I had to step back one day. And I had to ask myself, what's the point of all the shite that's going on these days? And there's no other conclusion that I could draw other than eventually people on the left want to diminish the Constitution and authority to the point where I believe, sir, they really want to rewrite a new Constitution and do away with what we have right now. And part and parcel of that is schools, universities, diminishing the founding fathers, going overboard in that regard, Antifa, the riots, etc. And I believe you hit on it right from the very beginning.
Well, BZ, here's the thing, and you know what? If we this is a long discussion we can have, and if you want to go, if you need me to go past the bottom of the hour, let me know, and I can go to the top or however long you need me, because you've kind of opened this door too. But here's the thing, the ultimate goal of progressivism, okay? The ultimate goal is a centralized society.
Yep.
And you're talking about they want to run, and let's specifically talk about the United States of America and what progressives want here, okay? And I always there's a distinct difference between a progressive, a liberal. We have progressive Republicans, we have progressive Democrats. But the ultimate goal of progressivism is a centralized society. They want to run everything out of, here in the United States, out of Washington, D.C. That would be funneled out to centralized to the state capitals, and then from the state capitals, that would be run out to centralized urban areas. Okay? They want all of education centralized. They want all of healthcare centralized. They want everything centralized and managed by the federal government. And in order to do that, because our Constitution will not allow that, okay, the current makeup of the federal government and the current makeup of the different branches of government, through the judicial branch, the executive branch, through the House and through the Senate, etc., through all the different way, and all the way down to the way the state legislatures and the way the state, the states do, even though it's kind of gotten topsy-turvy. I always tell people that we were founded as the United States of America, not America. Now, for some reason, it's been turned upside down. But there is the states do still maintain a little bit of sovereignty, even though it gets chipped away at as Washington D.C. withholds more money and more monies and tightens up the purse strings to bring the states into submission. And I don't say into line, I say into submission, because that is what happens when they dangle the money and the purse strings. But bottom line is that in order to accomplish all of that, you literally are going to have to, if the progressives want their ultimate vision of utopia, they're going to have to literally scrap the way our country is today, everything it stands for, everything the way it was founded. And that will mean doing away with the Constitution of the United States of America. And when you do away with the Constitution, you have to rewrite it. And when you do that, that allows them to, guess what, folks? That allows them to remake the government as well. This doesn't just go as far as rewriting the Constitution. This would go as far as to completely remaking the makeup of our government. The way you see the the way you see Congress today, the way you see the state legislatures today, the way you see the executive branch, and most important, and you want to know why the fight over Supreme Court nominees and justices is so important, why court appointments on the federal benches are so important right now, and why the Republicans need to use their brains a little bit, which my personal opinion, they're not right now. This is why, because more important, because the judicial branch usually is the final say in stopping all of this nonsense. And progressives would need to remake all of this in their image. And folks, that would lead to, I think personally, it would go even further from a socialized society. I think it would actually lead, and I've talked about this before, I think it would actually lead into a new form of communism, communism on steroids. And it would take away everybody's rights. You would not have any say in your children's education. They would tell you how many children to have. It would come down to tell you if you could have children or not. This would come down to, as far as health care. You know what? I always go back to this. There's the old Twilight Zone episode called dealing with, you're obsolete. People would become obsolete, and you would start seeing people killed because they were no longer useful to society. And folks, if you think that sounds like 1984, that's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what you have described. Well, let me ask you a final question. There's going to be a break. It's the bottom of the hour, folks. You're listening to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon here on the SHR Media Network and also on High Plains Pundit Media and radio on YouTube and Facebook. And we've been talking to Dan Butcher. Question for you, Dan. Can you hang on for maybe, say, another 15 minutes and we can continue the conversation over the break? Would that be okay with you?
You bet. Not a problem.
Okay, great. Folks, hang on. Don't go anywhere. You're going to be right back. We're going to continue with Dan Butcher, and we're going to talk about big, big items. Big mind items. Don't go back. Don't go away.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, it's Sean from the Sackheads Radio Show. Also one of the owners here at the SHR Media Network. Are you opinionated? Have you ever wanted to do your own show? Have you ever heard somebody like the Sackheads and go, yeah, I could probably do that better? Well, now's your chance. Send me a 5-minute clip at sackheadsradio@gmail.com, and maybe you can be part of the SHR broadcasting team. sackheadsradio@gmail.com.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. You didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying Catholic is stupid.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
The bloviating Zeppelin. He's big-footed enough radio shows to last a lifetime, courtesy of Sean, Clint, Ken, and Jersey Joe. Now it's time for him to waddle on his own 2 feet via the glorious SHR Media. Gird thy loins for the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon. Coming soon to ossicles near you. Excelsior.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon, live and direct from BZ Sierra Nevada Airy in occupied California, doing the job the American media maggots won't, featuring right thinking from a left brain, working without a net and under an assassination order. Here is the Bloviating Zeppelin.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, you are in fact listening to the Tuesday night version of the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon. We were speaking to Dan Butcher, owner and media magnate extraordinaire, and I don't mean M-A-G-N-E-T, I mean M-A-G-N-A-T-E, and we were talking about some really big ticket concepts. Dan had mentioned at the beginning of the hour, at the beginning of the show, that it appeared to him that the Constitution, or the removal of the Constitution, was pretty much foremost in the minds of progressive leftists, etc. He opened that door and I walked on through it. And I asked Dan if he could continue for about another 15 minutes or so we could continue this conversation because, quite frankly, I find it absolutely fascinating and filled with truth and at the same time rather frightening. Dan, you want to continue with that? You were saying that basically the goal is to remove, well, I can't think of any other way to phrase it other than to remove freedoms in the United States because already students are apparently so willing to do that, to give up their freedoms.
Sure they are, and I just want to, I want to remind everybody. Last time BZ asked me to stick around for 15 more minutes. It was 2 hours, but anyway, I want to, before I go on, BZ, I find these conversations just absolutely fascinating.
Me too,
because because here's the thing: when I do shows like this. And this is why I like to talk about things like this. It's because I want people to learn, and I want to open up the discussion because a lot of the stuff tonight, I'm giving you my views, I'm giving you my ideas, what I think is happening, and so I want to learn because I want to hear from other people. I want to just make this discussion, and that's the way we deal with this. Open up the discussion. We have to discuss it, and that is what progressives are scared of. They're scared of having the discussion. You want to scare a progressive, come to the table with actual facts and figures. You want to scare a progressive, come to the table with truth. And that goes back to why, that goes back to the opening story you were talking about from Campus Reform. Why you see these folks advocating violence is because it has got to that point that they are so determined that they see no other way to make the changes other than to resort to violence. And folks, this is, I hear people try to compare, well, we saw this type of stuff in the 60s. Well, folks, there was a difference between a lot of the violence and a lot of the fights that we saw during the civil rights movement and a lot of the different things that we saw during the 1960s. This is a whole different ballgame. We're talking about folks now that are openly calling for the overthrow of the United States government, openly calling for the Constitution to be ripped up and shredded, openly calling for history to be replaced. Think about that, folks. And I'll come back to the civil rights movement.
Well, it's being replaced right before our eyes. History is being removed right in front of our faces every day.
Exactly, and I'm a student of Martin Luther King Jr. and I love the teachings of Martin Luther King Jr. Now he was human. He was a very fallible man. He made a lot of mistakes in his personal life, but he's rolling over in his grave because people don't understand that the teachings of Martin Luther King went much further than the civil rights movement. It went into society as a whole. He had the knowledge and the foresight to see, what, a lot of the stuff that is affecting the black community in his time would be affecting a lot of different communities and a lot of different demographics and dynamics in the future. And when he did his teachings, he was a leader in the black community, but he was a lead. He wasn't only talking to the black community. He was also talking to everybody as a whole about what could happen in the future if we did not learn the lessons of the past. And one of the big things that you have seen throughout history is the erasing of history itself. The Nazis in Germany wanted to erase history. They wanted to create their own history.
ISIS is doing that now.
Other dictatorships do the same thing.
ISIS is doing that now in the Middle East.
Yes,
that's called a clue.
Yes. And so what's the easiest way to make a lot of these changes and to make your narrative believable? That is to do away with truth, to do away with facts. How do you do that? You erase history. How do you erase history? Well, you try to change the way the civil rights movement actually was, and how things progressed throughout the history of that movement. Well, what else do? You tear down statues. You remove statues so that the truths of, here's the thing, folks. Civil War monuments are not put up to glorify the Civil War. They are to remind you of what took place, okay? And so in removing a lot of those, you're erasing history. So you start with those, and then guess what, folks? You start taking down the Lincoln Memorial. You start taking down the Washington Monument. Oh, you know what? The White House itself is a monument. We need to destroy that. Oh, Capitol Hill itself. That's a big building. We probably need to destroy that and build a new one. I think you're getting at what I'm talking about here. In order to remake the country, and I went into, touched on it a little bit, and having to redo the government, but it starts with the basic principle is that you have to erase the history of the country to begin with so that you can create your own history. And in the case of progressivism, is nothing more than a false narrative.
What is that? That's the Cloward-Piven effect.
Yes.
Folks, if you don't know what Cloward-Piven is, go to your favorite little search engine. I'm not going to tell you it's the G word. Go to your favorite search engine and Google Cloward-Piven effect. And it goes something like this. I know Dan already knows this. That's this. You tear down the society completely. You place demands upon it that it can in no way or fashion meet. And in the process of tearing it down, then you build it back up into the type of society that you want. That's the Cloward-Piven effect. Massive leftists, Marxists, essentially, making that decision. That's what you're pointing out right now. I've always said, if you control two things, you've got America by the nuts. And that's this. One, SCOTUS. Two, education. Well, leftists are pretty much in control of education. And trust me, they're working on SCOTUS, which is why Trump in here right now, no matter what you say about him, ultimately, my big goal is, and I make no bones about it whatsoever, if we don't stack the crap out of SCOTUS, this nation is done. And Dan, it's not just the nation, because it's the rest of the world. As the U.S. goes, so goes the rest of the world. China, Russia would love, North Korea for that matter, Iran would love nothing more than to see a completely emasculated United States of America. Would they not?
Oh, they would. That's exactly what they would like to see. And let me go a little bit further and give this as an example too. Coming back kind of a roundabout way again. The crown jewel of progressivism is dealing with social issues. They love to take social issues, and they love to put false narratives in the social issues. And I will go out right now, and I will tell you, if you are a homosexual and you believe that progressives care about you, you are a fool. Because progressives only care about gay marriage for one thing. And they want to use gay marriage as a tool to do away with what? Freedom of religion. Yep. That's the ultimate goal.
Yep.
That is the ultimate goal. They want to use that as a pathway to force churches and religions as a whole to recognize gay marriage. And once that happens, well, then you can start chipping away at freedom of religion. If you are in the black community and you believe that progressives care about you, you are a fool. Progressives only care about you to further their agenda, to advance their agenda. Because once they have used the minority communities, once they have used the inner cities, they move on. It's kind of like, think of it as kind of like War of the Worlds. when you had the machines come down, the war machines from the aliens coming down, how they moved from each community and were destroying. What they were doing was that particular race came to planets to zap all of the natural resources out. Well, stop and think about that. That's really what progressivism does. And if you want the examples, they're there. Detroit, Baltimore, up and down the East Coast, up and down in the inner cities. They zap every resource they possibly can. And why do they do that? To make people dependent on the government. And once they're dependent on the government, hey, they've got you. And that is the ultimate goal of progressivism, to get control and maintain that control.
Frank Underwood from House of Cards. Folks, if you're not watching House of Cards, you're doing yourself a disservice. Frank Underwood, played by Kevin Spacey, said this, and whoever the writer was that put these words in his mouth evidently knows D.C. Frank Underwood said this: "It's not about the money. It's about the power." And what you said, Dan, is absolutely correct. It's about power and control. When you have both, then the money will come. The spice will flow, so to speak. Donald Trump had a speech today in the UN.
Yeah.
And I'm going to play that speech later on tonight. I don't know if I'll get to all of it. There's so much to talk about. Holy crap. But in any event, one of the things that he did is he took Venezuela to task and said essentially that you're a socialist nation. I'm calling you out on it. And guess what? Socialism isn't working. What I've said about this is every other person thinks that the person that was before them really didn't know how to do socialism, and that the new guy in town, they really know how to do socialism better. But it's never worked. Look at Venezuela. So, hey, Dan, do you think that's going to work just like a charm in the United Snakes of America?
Oh, sure. Socialism's always worked, just like that throughout history. Isn't Cuba such a wonderful vacation destination right now? Don't you just want to hop on the plane and go to Cuba and visit all the beaches and stuff right now? I mean, it's lunacy. There is, once again, this comes back to common sense. There is no common sense principle whatsoever that justifies socialism, that justifies communism, et cetera, et cetera. The Chinese are kind of in a unique situation. They are trying to, I think the Chinese are trying to create their own version of a system combining capitalism and communism. The government maintains control, but give the people just a little bit of just enough taste of capitalism, and then you know what? Hey, maybe we can keep them under control. The problem with that is, that we've seen that before. When anybody ever gets that taste of freedom, that's the key thing. When they get that taste of freedom, they want more, and they want more. And that is exactly the opposite of what progressivism is. And I lump socialism, communism, all of those type of systems into progressivism, that is to take away and eat away at freedom, to take more of it away, to take more of it away, to take more of it away. And I'll touch on this real quick, folks. If you did not, make sure when BZ plays Trump's speech at the United Nations Day, you listen to it very closely. He did not beat around the bush. He had tough words for Venezuela. He had extremely tough words for North Korea. He basically said today that the exact wording was the Rocket Man is on a suicide mission, referring to Little Kim in North Korea. He also, throughout the last couple of days that he's been in the UN, he's had some tough words for the UN itself, saying there needs to be some major policy changes at the UN. He has gone into the lion's den like David and has been slaying the lions at the UN. He's not been messing around. And that's when Trump's at his best. Like I said, Trump's not been perfect. He's made a lot of mistakes. But this is when Trump is at his best. Now, I will say this. A lot of the comments that Trump is making about North Korea, he needs to be careful with some of those so that he does not start sounding like Little Kim, it starts just throwing insults back and forth. He needs to be very precise in what he is saying. But, he basically said today, if the United States is threatened, he has no problems whatsoever wasting North Korea.
I would completely agree. I think the UN, I've thought this for quite some time, the UN would make a great set of condos looking out over to the East River, or it would make a wonderful set of condos for disabled veterans, one of the two. The UN can go back to, I don't know, ship it to Amsterdam or something like that. The UN, how useful is the UN when the last 20 of 24 sanctions levied by the United Nations is against Israel? What the hell is up with that? That's just lunacy. It's a bunch of people going in, speaking pablum, laying down various sanctions that go nowhere, and in a worst case scenario, they'll send people in with blue helmets and blue Land Rovers. Ooh, dictators are quaky in their boots the world over.
Well, here's the thing about the UN. I've always thought that the UN would actually look, I think it would look great in downtown Tehran, personally. I think that's where they should move it. But bottom line is the United Nations has become nothing more. The ultimate agenda of the United Nations is wealth redistribution. That is where the big thing with climate change. And, they push the climate change narrative.
That's
and
correct.
Bottom line is the reason they push that, all of the policies with the United Nations today is wealth redistribution.
And the sad thing is, we were buying into it under Barack Hussein Obama.
Yeah.
We're not buying into it anymore. But the sad thing is that the Caucasoids of Western civilization in Europe, they've bought into it heart and soul. I call them GAUPs. I've had this little acronym for quite some time, and I believe it completely fits most every Western European leader, who I should like to point out. Well, first I'll tell you what a GAUP is. A GAUP is a guilty, overeducated white person. Now, having said that, tell me how many current Western leaders in Europe have children? I'll wait for that answer.
Golly, zero.
Almost none.
Yeah. I'm trying to think off the top of my head who has children.
How much skin do they really have in this game? I'm just throwing that out there, just for consideration. They're buying into it, heart and soul.
Well, if you want to know who has a skin in the game, follow the money. The money trail is there. And I've written article after article about this. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This isn't nonsense that we're talking about here.
No, it's
Follow
not.
the money. The United Nations is big money, folks. And once again, the United Nations, a very progressive organization. It is run by progressives. They want centralized control. That the United Nations would love to control every nation on the earth from wherever they would like to be headquartered. But the way they want to accomplish that, and that bottom line is follow the money, follow where they're trying to redistribute the wealth, trying to buy people off. Think about that. Think about what progressivism is. Basically, it makes a lot of promises. It gives people just enough. It dangles just enough there to keep them coming back for more and more and more.
Bottom line on that, Dan, is I have to go this. It's, to quote a word used by leftists the globe over, it's unsustainable. It's an unsustainable philosophy. It's parasitic in nature. You always run out of hosts when you're that. The United States, historically, especially after World War II and the Marshall Plan, has been basically the United States has held its arm out, and it's watched as the syringe from the globe has gone in after people have sort of, slapped it around for a while, slapped that arm. Okay, let's see if we can raise a vein. And then the United States vein comes up, and they're all welcome to tap into it. While they're tapping the United States vein, they're also excoriating the United States for being a great consumer of energy, a great consumer of property, etc., when they don't tell you that it's also the United States that's responsible for the welfare of most all of those other nations. So again, as you pointed out earlier, what does the world look like when the United States goes away? What does the world do then?
It's a very scary place. You know what? If you want to see, let's kind of use the alternate universe theory here for a second. If you want to imagine, just imagine this in your head, okay? Imagine if the Axis powers had won World War II. Imagine if Germany had actually won World War II. The United States was defeated, and Nazism became the way of the world. Imagine that for a second, what took place with the genocide with the Jews. Imagine that would have spread into more genocide of other races, of inferior people. There's nothing more sickening, and it should make you sick to your stomach. It should make you mad as hell. It should thoroughly piss you off at the thought of what if Nazi Germany had won that war, and the United States would have eventually been exterminated from the face of the earth. We would have no power. It would have been the Nazis that were controlling Europe and spreading into other parts of the world. It would have been Japan controlling the Asian peninsula. It would, think about that for a second, how scary that is. Think about all of the violence that took place, all of the evil. If you want to talk about, if you want the example of pure evil existing, there it was. This would be a very, very dark place. There would be no freedoms. You would not be able to do anything. If you blinked the wrong way, you would be shot on sight.
Mengele would have been revered.
That's what happened.
Mengele would have been revered. Margaret Sanger would have been held up on a pedestal. That's precisely what would have happened. We have about another minute left. Sometime in the future, I'd love to continue this conversation because it's really fun listening and hearing how your mind works and functions, because I find myself in quite a similar situation. But before we go, I'd like you to tell folks where they can find you, your sites, your media, everything. Where can we find Dan Butcher?
I tell you what, you go to one website address. You go to highplainspundit.com. You go to highplainspundit.com. That will get you to High Plains Pundit Radio. That'll get you to High Plains Pundit TV. That'll get you to our daily newsletter, which is now over 50,000 subscribers strong. That'll get you. You can find all of our social media outlets, because I'm looking at the top of it now. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them now. So different social media outlets that we're on. But you go to highplainspundit.com. You can find everything there.
Dan, I have to tell you personally, from me to you and everybody else that's listening, I thank you ever so much for even suggesting that you carry the show, that you carry the radio show, that you carry the YouTube version of it. So from me to you, I have to say it means quite a good deal to me, and I'm in your debt. Thank you kindly for that.
You know what? No, I thank you, BZ, because for everybody that's on High Plains Pundit Radio, that's on the website. The sole reason that we launched doing that was just to give folks another platform. We're very blessed into what it's grown into, and it's, in all honesty, we're in your debt for allowing us to carry those programs, and hopefully, we give you a bigger audience. We give you another outlet, another little slice of the big worldwide net for you to be heard and to be seen. But no, I am in debt to you guys that put out the programs, put out the quality content, and allow a political hack such as myself to come on and talk. Buddy, there's nothing more that I enjoy than just sitting back. You know what? Sometimes, we had a very deep conversation tonight. Man, there's other times that I like to come on and just BS and just have a good time, and we get to do that. We get to do actually both of those. When I get to come on your show, we get to discuss some great issues, have some great conversations, and then just BS a little bit, just have a lot of fun.
That's true. So tell you what, Dan, God willing and the creek don't rise, would you be interested in coming back next Tuesday? Because as per normal, I'd sure like to have you.
Oh man, I'd be more than happy to, buddy. As long it shouldn't be a problem at all.
Great, folks. You've been listening to Dan Butcher here on the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon. We're going to go to a break, and then we're going to jump into more buttery political goodness here in the saloon on the SHR Radio Network and also on the High Plains Pundit Media. Folks, don't go away. Come right back.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, it's Sean from the Sackheads Radio Show, also one of the owners here at the SHR Media Network. Are you opinionated? Have you ever wanted to do your own show? Have you ever heard somebody like the Sackheads and go, yeah, I could probably do that better? Well, now's your chance. Send me a 5-minute clip at sackheadsradio@gmail.com. and maybe you can be part of the SHR broadcasting team. sackheadsradio@gmail.com.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians,
You got a business. You didn't build that.
a team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying Catholic, stupid.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sako as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on SHRmedia.com.
The bloviating Zeppelin. He's big-footed enough radio shows to last a lifetime, courtesy of Sean, Clint, Ken, and Jersey Joe. Now it's time for him to waddle on his own 2 feet via the glorious SHR Media. Gird thy loins for the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon. Coming soon to ossicles near you. Excelsior.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, we're in hour 2 of the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon, right here on the SHR Media Network, High Plains Pundit Media. And also, we're broadcasting live. You can watch us live on YouTube. You can watch us live on Facebook. Go to the SHR Media Facebook page, and you can watch me live right now. Go to the SHR Media channel on YouTube, and you can watch me live right now, right here, in these very same circumstances. Now, I have some political buttery goodness to go into, but first, you know, we were talking to Dan. Always have a great time talking to Dan. And I have a happy story. This is a grand story. And so, right off the bat, I got to go there.
It's time for happy stories and good times.
And here's the deal. Dreamers lovingly embrace Democrat Nancy Pelosi. If you didn't catch this, then doggone it, you should have. Here's just a brief view of the buttery Nancy Pelosi goodness that left us this huzzah. We love Nancy Pelosi. Don't they all? They certainly must, I bet.
Okay, you've cut off the dreamers who are here to speak. I know, I understand it. And you've had.
Oh, no.
Can I have my time? Everyone. Huh? Everyone, hey.
Oh, no. Did that really happen to Nancy Pelosi? These are pro-immigration protesters confronting lovely Nancy Pelosi at a pro-DACA event.
Okay, you've asked some questions.
They don't want to hear her talk.
I totally agree with you. But as we fight the fight for the dreamers, which is our...
We're not dreamers. I want you to hear this, because I'm going to make a point.
As we fight the fight, you don't. It's clear. You don't want any answers. Just stop it now. Let's stop it now. Stop it. Stop it. Look, I want to tell you something. You can.
This is grand.
Why would you do this? Since you don't want to listen, we'll have to just go. You don't want to.
So you know what, Nancy Pelosi? The only comment that I have to you is this. Welcome to the world of conservatives, because that is exactly what conservatives have been fighting and listening to all this time. So, did you like that, Nancy Pelosi? Did you enjoy that, Nancy Pelosi? Something tells me you didn't quite enjoy that. Well, you know what? San Fran Nan, welcome to my world. Oh, here's the world that the leftists currently occupy, because they were sure everything was a shoo-in. It was all a shoo-in, right?
Tomorrow night, I think, when Hillary Clinton wins, that Donald Trump will have lost this election from the very first day he announced and took off after Mexicans.
Classic Trump. I think you have to view last night's debate as Donald Trump's concession speech. He realizes he can't win.
He had no chance, in my view. The numbers are going to bear that out tomorrow.
Well, I can't find a single Republican who now thinks they're going to win.
There's the single Republican who thinks he can win.
25% of the Republican base behind you and expect to win in a general. You just can't.
That's an awfully difficult lead to make up. It really is at this point, particularly when Trump's negatives remain in the 60s, which is just almost unprecedented.
We may lose by historic proportions.
Historic
proportions.
No. I think Donald Trump has fooled himself into looking at his
his crowds and the rallies and the size, and he thinks that's America.
He had no chance to win doing what he was doing and with the Latino community feeling so targeted from the very first day he announced.
This guy isn't a Republican. He can't beat Hillary Clinton.
He can't beat Hillary
now,
Clinton.
A historic moment. We can now project the winner of the presidential race. CNN projects Donald Trump wins the presidency.
No.
The business tycoon and TV personality capping his improbable political journey with an astounding upset victory. Donald J. Trump will become the 45th president of the United States, defeating Hillary Clinton in a campaign unlike anything we've seen in our lifetime.
Oh, right. You know what, leftists? I think you all need to take a large cup of shut the fuck up, because guess what? Donald Trump was at the UN and had a few things to say. And you know me and Nigel Farage. I really enjoy his viewpoint, and I think he had something to say about Donald Trump's speech at the UN, don't you?
In America, we do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone, but rather to let it shine as an example for everyone to watch.
That was a very small part of a major speech.
By the way, this is Stuart Varney on Varney and Company, speaking to Nigel Farage.
By our president to the United Nations, which was really forceful and direct. Come on in, please. Fox News contributor Nigel Farage. Nigel, I know you watched that speech.
Sorry, but I really like this guy.
I wanted you to tell us, how would the Europeans react to that speech?
Well, there was pants-shitting hysteria for one thing. People had to trade trousers all over the UK.
How would the Brits react to that speech? Tell us.
Well, let's be clear, that was vintage Trump. It was all the themes that got him elected as US president. And that it was so good, it should be bottled, in my opinion. But then again, of course, I'm a supporter. Now, how would the people in the building behind me, and more particularly in Brussels in the European Union, have reacted to that speech? They will be absolutely horrified.
They'll be gobsmacked because, just like I said, the gaups, the guilty, overeducated white people, and Trump said the exact opposite of what it is that they theatrically believe.
That Trump dared to speak. Well, because he dared to speak about the nation state being the building block for humanity.
Uh-oh, you mean sovereignty? Freedom? Sovereignty?
He dared to speak about the concept of culture within a nation.
Oh, can't say the word culture. Oh, God, go straight to hell, Donald Trump.
And the need to protect it. He even...
Wait, protect culture? The only culture worth protecting is every other culture except that of the West. Isn't that right?
Committed the heresy at the United Nations of saying that mass migration was bad for both the receiver and for the donor country. So on all of those levels, you know, the EU crowd, the Blairites in London, the Clintonites in America would all be horrified.
Yeah,
but I
not would be horrified. They were horrified.
Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, but Nigel, you're referring to the elites and how they would react to this speech. Look, Britain is still in a terror mindset. It barely recovered from that terror attack in London. And here's President Trump saying, we're going to root out those who finance terror. We're going to crush the loser terrorists. I would have thought that...
Oh, you can't talk like that. You can't talk like that. Not in the UN. Not in the UN. You have to use puffy headphones if you're going to talk like that.
Ordinary people in Britain would very much support that kind of thing.
Oh, I think you're on the money with that comment. I think, once again, this shows the gulf between the sort of PC political set that we have in Britain and Europe and ordinary people. And do you know what? You know, as you say, we've had repeated terrorist attacks. One that happened here in London last week that mercifully wasn't as bad as it might have been. And I think ordinary people hearing a global leader standing up at the UN and saying, we will do all we can to confront terrorism and to threats to our culture and our way of life. I have a feeling that this president, who's had a very bad press here in the United Kingdom, I have a feeling his approval ratings in this country would have gone up significantly once they've heard this speech.
That's a very interesting point. Now, Nigel Farage wasn't the only one who weighed in. There's another individual that I greatly respect who also had a few things to say. Who would that be? Oh, yes, former U.S. Ambassador John Bolton.
Contributor with me now, and sir, good morning yet again. Sum it up. What did you think?
This was the best speech of the Trump presidency, in my view. I think he was as clear and direct as it's possible to be.
That's John Bolton saying that about Trump's speech. From him, I consider that golden.
You listed a number of the key points that he made. I think the centerpiece of the speech was the criticism of the behavior of North Korea and Iran. And I think it's safe to say in the entire history of the United Nations, there has never been a more straightforward criticism of the behavior, the unacceptable behavior of other member states. On North Korea, the president said that if we are forced to, we will have no choice but the total destruction of North Korea.
Let's just chalk it up to this. John Bolton thinks that it was a damn good speech.
General,
so,
Mr. President,
if you haven't heard it, you're going to hear it
leaders,
now with a few salient comments.
Delegates, welcome.
Because
to New
there
York.
were a lot more great things said than what the media portrayed.
In my home city,
let's listen.
As a representative of the American people, to address the people of the world. As millions of our citizens continue to suffer the effects of the devastating hurricanes that have struck our country, I want to begin by expressing my appreciation to every leader in this room who has offered assistance and aid. The American people are strong and resilient, and they will emerge from these hardships more determined than ever before. Fortunately, the United States has done very well since Election Day last November 8th. The stock market is at an all-time high, a record. Unemployment is at its lowest level in 16 years, and because of our regulatory and other reforms, we have more people working in the United States today than ever before.
Why might that be? One of the reasons that you didn't see an increase and that Barack Obama didn't get above about a 2% GDP growth, which is absolutely staggeringly unprecedented, that it was kept so terribly low is because businesses generally didn't know whether to shy to go blind. They were continuously under the gun. They were waiting for things to be adjudged, Obamacare if nothing else, and they felt in their heart of hearts, there was another big-ass shoe that was just going to come down and stamp on their necks.
Companies are moving back, creating job growth, the likes of which our country has not seen in a very long time.
Remember 1 month, the very first month of the tenure of President Trump, lots of companies came back to the United States, and domestic companies decided that instead of building plants, say, in other countries, they were going to build them there in the United States. Massive plus. Could that have happened under Barack Obama? I don't think so.
And it has just been announced that we will be spending almost $700 billion on our military and defense. Our military will soon be the strongest it has ever been.
And it's the weakest it has ever been under Barack Hussein Obama. If you never watched the particular series about basically the emasculization of the U.S. military, the documentary that Brett Baer did, where we find people in the Air Force having to scavenge parts off of old jets to make them fly, we're in a terrible, terrible state. Underfunded and over-demanded, that's the U.S. military.
For more than 70 years, in times of war and peace, the leaders of nations, movements, and religions have stood before this assembly. Like them, I intend to address some of the very serious threats before us today, but also the enormous potential waiting to be unleashed. We live in a time of extraordinary opportunity. Breakthroughs in science, technology, and medicine
are curing illnesses and solving problems that prior generations thought impossible to solve. But each day also brings news of growing dangers that threaten everything we cherish and value. Terrorists and extremists have gathered strength and spread to...
Oh my God. Here's someone who actually said the word terrorist in an open UN forum. Oh my God.
Every region of the planet. Rogue regimes represented in this body not only support terrorists, but threaten other nations and their own people with the most destructive weapons known to humanity. Authority and authoritarian powers seek to collapse the values, the systems and alliances that prevented conflict and tilted the world toward freedom.
When he says values, he means Western values. Another phrase you dare not use in the UN. And I'm very serious when I say that. That's how the UN thinks.
Since World War II, international criminal networks traffic drugs, weapons, people, forced dislocation and mass migration, threaten our borders, and new forms of aggression exploit technology to menace our citizens. To put it simply, we meet at a time of both immense promise and great peril. It is entirely up to us whether we lift the world to new heights or let it fall into a valley of disrepair. We have it in our power, should we so choose, to lift millions from poverty, to help our citizens realize their dreams, and to ensure that new generations of children are raised free from violence, hatred, and fear.
Now, this is a positive thing. All throughout this speech, Trump makes a number of positive comments, not one of which was covered by the American media maggots. It was all negative in their words. Bullshit. There was a grand number of positive messages that he made in this 42-minute speech.
This institution was founded in the aftermath of 2 world wars to help shape this better future. It was based on the vision that diverse nations could cooperate to protect their sovereignty, preserve their security.
There he goes again, sovereignty. That's not what it's about anymore, certainly not in Europe.
And promote their prosperity. It was in the same period, exactly 70 years ago, that the United States developed the Marshall Plan to help restore Europe. Those 3 beautiful pillars, they're pillars of peace, sovereignty, security, and prosperity.
And what did the United States not do as victors in World War II? Oh, that's right. We didn't keep any property. Instead, we stepped in and rebuilt.
The Marshall Plan was built on the noble idea that the whole world is safer when nations are strong, independent, and free. As President Truman said in his message to Congress at that time, our support of European recovery is in full accord with our support of the United Nations. The success of the United Nations depends upon the independent strength of its members. To overcome the perils of the present and to achieve the promise of the future, we must begin with the wisdom of the past. Our success depends on a coalition of strong and independent nations that embrace their sovereignty to promote security, prosperity, and peace for themselves and for the world.
Europe doesn't want to hear a fucking thing about sovereignty.
We do not expect diverse countries to share the same cultures, traditions, or even systems of government. But we do expect all nations to uphold these 2 core sovereign duties: to respect the interests of their own people and the rights of every other sovereign nation.
He throws sovereign around. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that.
This is the beautiful vision of this institution. And this is the foundation for cooperation and success. Strong sovereign nations let diverse countries with different values, different cultures, and different dreams not just coexist, but work side by side on the basis of mutual respect.
Globalists and Western European leaders were cringing at every word in this speech. Bank on it.
Strong sovereign nations let their people take ownership of the future and control their own destiny. And strong sovereign nations allow individuals to flourish in the fullness of the life intended by God. In America.
Stop. He said God. Are you kidding me? At this point, Western European leaders are flipping.
In America, we do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone, but rather to let it shine as an example for everyone to watch. Respect.
Listen to this. Again, this was one of the big crux of the biscuits in his speech.
Strong sovereign nations let their people take ownership of the future and control their own destiny. And strong sovereign nations allow individuals to flourish in the fullness of the life intended by God. In America, we do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone.
Nor should we.
But rather to let it shine as an example for everyone to watch. This week gives our country a special reason to take pride in that example. We are celebrating the 230th anniversary of our beloved Constitution, the oldest Constitution still in use in the world today. This time.
By the way, and the only Constitution that doesn't have a proscription in it against hate speech. If you didn't realize that, you do now. It's the only major Constitution that has no proscription, I should say, in it about hate speech. That speaks volumes.
Timeless document has been the foundation of peace, prosperity, and freedom for the Americans, and for countless millions around the globe whose own countries have found inspiration in its respect for human nature, human dignity, and the rule of law. The greatest in the United States Constitution is its first three beautiful words. They are, "We the people." Generations of Americans have sacrificed to maintain the promise of those words, the promise of our country and of our great history. In America, the people govern, the people rule, and the people are sovereign. I was elected not to take power, but to give power to the American people where it belongs.
If the damn Republicans would support him and the things that he wants to do. He's going bipartisan? I wonder why. Would that be because the Republicans are not supporting him, the Republican, what I call the establishhacks?
In foreign affairs, we are renewing this founding principle of sovereignty. Our government's first duty is to its people, to our citizens, to serve their needs, to ensure their safety, to preserve their rights, and to defend their values. As President of the United States, I will always put America first, just like you, as the leaders of your countries, will always and should always put your countries first.
Wait. Is that applause that I hear in the background when Trump says America first and your countries first? Because trust me, there is no applause sign in the UN.
All responsible leaders have an obligation to serve their own citizens, and the nation-state remains the best vehicle for elevating the human condition. But making a better life for our people also requires us to work together in close harmony and unity to create a more safe and peaceful future for all people.
What did Trump just say there, about a sentence or two back? Here's what he said. He said, globalists can go to hell. Folks, come right back.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, it's Sean from the Sackheads Radio Show, also one of the owners here at the SHR Media Network. Are you opinionated? Have you ever wanted to do your own show? Have you ever heard somebody like the Sackheads and go, yeah, I could probably do that better? Well, now's your chance. Send me a 5-minute clip at sackheadsradio@gmail.com, and maybe you can be part of the SHR broadcasting team. sackheadsradio@gmail.com.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians.
You got a business. That you didn't build that.
A team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying Catholic, stupid.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
The bloviating Zeppelin. He's big-footed enough radio shows to last a lifetime, courtesy of Sean, Clint, Ken, and Jersey Joe. Now it's time for him to waddle on his own 2 feet via the glorious SHR Media. Gird thy loins for the bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon, coming soon to ossicles near you. Excelsior.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And you are listening to the SHR Media Network. This is the final segment. The bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon Radio Show. Tuesday, September 19th, year of our Lord 2017. We had Dan Butcher on earlier, and now we're listening to President Donald Trump make Westerners in Europe have kittens, throw camshafts, and grip their hearts and clutch their pearls. Just like Dave Milner in chat said, thanks for everybody to be in chat. Let's hope for a few heart attacks here and there.
The United States will forever be a great friend to the world, and especially to its allies. But we can no longer be taken advantage of or enter into a one-sided deal where the United States gets nothing in return.
Barack Obama.
As long as I hold this office, I will defend America's interests above all else. But in fulfilling our obligations to our own nations, we also realize that it's in everyone's interest to seek a future where all nations can be sovereign, prosperous, and secure. America does more than speak for the values expressed in the United Nations Charter. Our citizens have paid the ultimate price to defend our freedom and the freedom of many nations represented in this great hall.
Yes. World War I, World War II, Korea. Yes, our soldiers died on your soil.
America's devotion is measured on the battlefields where our young men and women have fought and sacrificed alongside of our allies.
And what did we do in return? Did we walk into your vaults and sack your gold? Did we take your property? Did we take your countries? Did we take your land? No, we didn't.
From the beaches of Europe to the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Asia. It is an eternal credit to the American character that even after we and our allies emerged victorious from the bloodiest war in history, we did not seek territorial expansion or attempt to oppose and impose our way of life on others.
Yeah, all we did is rebuild you, Europe, Japan.
Instead, we helped build institutions such as this one to defend the sovereignty, security, and prosperity for all. For the diverse nations of the world, this is our hope. We want harmony and friendship, not conflict and strife. We are guided by outcomes, not ideology. We have a policy of principled realism rooted in shared goals, interests, and values.
And there's Benjamin Netanyahu in the audience looking very closely at Donald Trump.
That realism forces us to confront a question facing every leader and nation in this room. It is a question we cannot escape or avoid. We will slide down the path of complacency, numb to the challenges, threats, and even wars that we face. Or do we have enough strength and pride to confront those dangers today so that our citizens can enjoy peace and prosperity tomorrow? If we desire to lift up our citizens, if we aspire to the approval of history, then we must fulfill our sovereign duties to the people we faithfully represent. We must protect our nations, their interests, and their futures. We must reject threats to sovereignty from the Ukraine to the South China Sea.
And also to the EU. Hello, Brussels. This is Donald Trump talking directly to Brussels, by the way.
We must uphold respect for law, respect for borders, and respect for culture, and the peaceful engagement these allow. And just as the founders of this body intended, we must work together and confront together those who threaten us with chaos, turmoil, and terror. The scourge of our planet today is a small group of rogue regimes that violate every principle on which the United Nations is based. They respect neither their own citizens nor the sovereign rights of their countries. If the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph. When decent people and nations become bystanders to history, the forces of destruction only gather power and strength. No one has shown more contempt for other nations and for the well-being of their own people than the depraved regime in North Korea.
There we go. Now we're naming names and shaming people, as we should, just by naming one nation, and he's just beginning, by the way, by naming one nation in public in the UN. That's just not done.
It is responsible for the starvation deaths of millions of North Koreans and for the imprisonment, torture, killing, and oppression of countless more. We were all witness to the regime's deadly abuse when an innocent American college student, Otto Warmbier, was returned to America only to die a few days later. We saw it.
That's because they didn't want him to die in their custody.
In the assassination of the dictator's brother using banned nerve agents in an international airport.
Oh, and there's the representative from North Korea looking chagrined.
We know it kidnapped a sweet 13-year-old Japanese girl from a beach in her own country to enslave her as a language tutor for North Korea's spies. If this is not twisted enough, now North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles threatens the entire world with unthinkable loss of human life. It is an outrage that some nations would not only trade with such a regime, but would arm, supply, and financially support a country that imperils the world with nuclear conflict.
China.
No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice.
Listen to this.
But to totally destroy North Korea.
And with that, trust me, leftists were shitting themselves all across the media today, in this continent and across the pond as well, for him daring to say that.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
Now, if I were smart, I would have had Elton John queued up at this point, wouldn't I?
The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about. That's what the United Nations is for. Let's see how they do.
Ooh, gauntlet hurled in public to the UN itself.
It is time for North Korea to realize that the denuclearization is its only acceptable future. The United Nations Security Council recently held 2 unanimous 15-0 votes adopting hard-hitting resolutions against North Korea, and I want to thank China and Russia for joining the vote to impose sanctions along with all of the other members of the Security Council.
Proving once again, according to leftists, that Donald Trump is in the pocket of Russia, right? Russia, 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 Russia.
Thank you to all involved. But we must do much more. It is time for all nations to work together to isolate the Kim regime until it ceases its hostile behavior.
Bingo.
We face this decision not only in North Korea. It is far past time for the nations of the world to confront another reckless regime, one that speaks openly of mass murder, vowing death to America, destruction to Israel, and ruin for many leaders and nations in this room.
Naming names and shaming things. Here it comes.
The Iranian government masks a corrupt dictatorship behind the false guise of a democracy. It has turned a wealthy country with a rich history and culture into an economically depleted rogue state whose chief exports are violence, bloodshed, and chaos, the longest suffering victims of Iran's leaders.
The Iranian delegate, by the way, appears to be on his phone. I'm sure he's sexting right now.
Are in fact its own people. Rather than use its resources to improve Iranian lives, its oil profits go to fund Hezbollah and other terrorists that kill innocent Muslims and attack their peaceful Arab and Israeli neighbors. This wealth, which rightly belongs to Iran's people, also goes to...
There's Netanyahu in the audience nodding, yes. Finally, we have someone supporting Israel in the UN. As I told Dan Butcher, 20 of the last 24 sanctions in the United Nations have been against Israel. That's fucking disgusting.
To shore up Bashar al-Assad's
and it's despicable.
Dictatorship, fuel Yemen's civil war, and undermine peace throughout the entire Middle East. We cannot let a murderous regime continue these destabilizing activities while building dangerous missiles, and we cannot abide by an agreement if it provides cover for the eventual construction of a nuclear program.
Unprompted, yet President Trump is actually getting applause in the UN.
The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into.
Here's a kick to the groin, well worth it, well due, overdue, by Donald Trump to the minuscule balls of Barack Hussein Obama.
Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it, believe me.
That is called a clue. Hold that in your pocket.
It is time for the entire world to join.
Now the Iranian delegate is actually looking at Donald Trump now.
Join us in demanding that Iran's government end its pursuit of death and destruction. It is time for the regime to free all Americans and citizens of other nations that they have unjustly detained. And above all, Iran's government must stop supporting terrorists, begin serving its own people, and respect the sovereign rights of its neighbors. The entire world understands that the good people of Iran want change. And other than the vast military power of the United States, that Iran's people are what their leaders fear the most.
That's true.
This is what causes the regime to restrict internet access, tear down satellite dishes, shoot unarmed student protesters, and imprison political reformers. Oppressive regimes cannot endure forever, and the day will come when the people will face a choice. Will they continue down the path of poverty, bloodshed, and terror? Or will the Iranian people return to the nation's proud roots as a center of civilization, culture, and wealth, where their people can be and prosperous once again?
And worse yet, the Iranian delegate has to sit there, shut up, and listen to this.
Iranian regime support for terror is in stark contrast to the recent commitments of many of its neighbors to fight terrorism and halt its finance. In Saudi Arabia early last year, I was greatly honored to address the leaders of more than 50 Arab and Muslim nations. We agreed that all responsible nations must work together to confront terrorists and the Islamic extremism that inspires them. We will stop radical Islamic terrorism because we cannot allow it to tear up our nation and indeed to tear up the entire world. We must deny the terrorists safe haven, transit, funding, and any form of support for their vile and sinister ideology.
This is absolutely unprecedented. The former president would never have had half the testosterone to be able to say something like this that is obvious, clear, and has needed saying for the past 9 years or more.
We must drive them out of our nations. It is time to expose and hold responsible those countries who support and finance terror groups like Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, the Taliban, and others that slaughter innocent people. The United States and our allies are working together throughout the Middle East to crush the loser terrorists and stop the reemergence of
the loser terrorists.
safe havens they use to launch attacks on all of our people. Last month, I announced a new strategy for victory in the fight against this evil in Afghanistan. From now on, our security interests will dictate the length and scope of military operations, not arbitrary benchmarks and timetables set up by politicians. I have also totally changed the rules of engagement in our fight against the Taliban.
That is extremely important, that the ROEs have been changed. What he's saying is that he's pushing power down. He has pushed power down to the generals and down to the commanders to do what they need to do when they need to do it. Absolutely. Again, unprecedented in recent United States history.
And other terrorist groups. In Syria and Iraq, we have made big gains toward lasting defeat of ISIS. In fact, our country has achieved more against ISIS in the last 8 months than it has in many, many years combined.
Obama.
We seek the de-escalation of the Syrian conflict and a political solution that honors the will of the Syrian people. The actions of the criminal regime of Bashar al-Assad, including the use of chemical weapons against his own citizens, even innocent children, shock the conscience of every decent person. No
representative from the Syrian Arab Republic leaning against his right hand and looking very bored with all of this.
Society can be safe if banned chemical weapons are allowed to spread. That is why...
Where did Syria get a lot of its chemical weapons? Let's see, BZ. Is it the I word?
The United States carried out a missile strike on the airbase that launched the attack. We appreciate the efforts of the United Nations agencies that are providing vital humanitarian assistance in areas liberated from ISIS, and we especially thank Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon for their role in hosting refugees from the Syrian conflict. The United States is a compassionate nation and has spent billions and billions of dollars in helping to support this effort. We seek an approach to refugee resettlement that is designed to help these horribly treated people and which enables their eventual return to their home countries to be part of the rebuilding process. For the cost of resettling one refugee in the United States.
Do you see what Trump is doing here? He's basically extending a hand to Europe, saying that if we can normalize Syria, perhaps some of these refugees can go back to the country that they really would like to be back in. He's trying to help you, Europe. You won't listen.
We can assist more than 10 in their home region. Out of the goodness of our hearts, we offer financial assistance to hosting countries in the region, and we support recent agreements of the G20 nations that will seek to host refugees as close to their home countries as possible. This is the safe, responsible, and humanitarian approach.
Exactly. Help to allow Syrians to go back to Syria.
For decades, the United States has dealt with migration challenges here in the Western Hemisphere. We have learned that over the long term, uncontrolled migration is deeply unfair to both the sending and the receiving countries.
Oh, you can't say that. Right around. See, this is the time when so many, and use this air quotes, leaders in Europe, they've shat their drawers and their pantsuits.
For the sending countries, it reduces domestic pressure to pursue needed political and economic reform and drains them of the human capital necessary to motivate and implement those reforms. For the receiving countries, the substantial costs of uncontrolled migration are borne overwhelmingly by low-income citizens whose concerns are often ignored by both media and government. I want to salute the work of the United Nations in seeking to address the problems that cause people to flee from their homes. The United Nations and African Union led peacekeeping missions to have invaluable contributions in stabilizing conflicts in Africa. The United States continues to lead the world in humanitarian assistance, including famine prevention and relief in South Sudan, Somalia, and northern Nigeria and Yemen.
Unstated, but is obvious, is that no, we're not going to do what Barack Hussein Obama wanted to do in the prior presidency. We're not going to open United States shores to people from Syria. NGH, not going to happen.
We have invested in better health and opportunity all over the world through programs like PEPFAR, which funds AIDS relief, the President's Malaria Initiative, the Global Health Security Agenda, the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery, and the Woman Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, part of our commitment to empowering women all across the globe.
Not a big plus with Islam.
We also thank
unprompted applause. That's number 3.
We also thank the Secretary General for recognizing that the United Nations must reform if it is to be an effective partner in confronting threats to sovereignty, security, and prosperity.
And that's what Donald Trump happened to say in the United Nations today. There's much, much, much more of that to go. And folks, I think I would like to have you come back tomorrow night for the Sackheads show, and then come back Thursday night when I'm going to have a few surprises for everyone on the 21st.
Monsieur has been lost.
So I say to you, one and all, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, I've got to thank you for listening to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon here on the SHR Media Network. You want to contact me, you can find me on Twitter at bzepp and on my blog at bloviatingzeppelin.net. Send me an email, excoriate me if you will, bz@shrmedia.com. My original music is by Possessed Tranquility. You can find them at reverbnation.com. Promotional consideration by Lockheed Martin Skunk Works and the Boeing Company. If it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. And tiaras are by My Little Pony. As per normal, I got to thank my personal KC-135 Kettle One refueling team with whom I will be consulting in less than an hour. Bank on it. Thank you. Thank Dan. Thank all of you ever so kindly for listening live. Thank you for being involved in the chat room. Thanks for listening in podcast, because it's obviously too damn late for you. God bless. Take care, folks, and you be safe. See you Thursday.
Everybody quiet down now and get some sleep.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Mama. Good night, Ben.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Mama. Good night, Daddy.
Good night, children. Good night, Daddy. Good night, Elizabeth.
Good night, John Boy. Good night, Jim Bob. Good night, Jim Bob.
Good night, Jim Bob. What's going on? I was asleep. What's everybody doing? Good night, Jim Bob. Go to sleep.
Good night, and good luck.